Welcome to this evening's webinar on the Solent Maritime Protecting Our Seabed Habitats. And we're looking at sustainable anchoring and mooring. You will see the web address for the Remedies project, which is saveourseabed.co.uk. So any of the information that we're covering in the webinar, you can go there and find out further details. The project also has social media, and that's probably the best way to keep updated with all the activities that are going on. It is a big project with lots of partners involved, and it's well worth following us and getting involved and keeping up to date. So this evening I'm delighted to be joined by Tim Ferrero from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, and also Caitlin Natson, who is the Natural England lead for the Remedies project in the Solent. And myself, I'm the campaign manager for the Green Blue, and that is the environmental awareness programme for the Royal Yachting Association and British Marine. And the RWA is a key partner in this project. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering this evening, we're going to have a bit of an introduction from Caitlin on what is the Remedies project, why was it set up, and what we're trying to achieve. And then Tim's going to tell us more about some of the habitats that the project's trying to protect, and in particular in the Solent is seagrass. Why is it such an important habitat and worth protecting? But then what is threatening this habitat, and in particular recreational activities? And from our perspective as boat users, how can we minimise any impact we might be having? And then I'm going to take you through from the RWA's perspective what we've been doing in the project, and provide you with some guidance around more sustainable anchoring techniques that you can adopt, but also introduce you to some new technology, which is advanced mooring systems, which are, improved design on our traditional moorings. And then Caitlin's going to give some very focused detail on the Solent and exactly what the project's been doing there, and there's been some fantastic work going on, so worth waiting for that. And of course, at the end, questions and answers, and please do add them in throughout, anything that comes up into your mind, and we will try our best to answer them. If not, we've got a big team behind us, and we will be able to point any of those questions that you may have to specific experts within the project. So I'm going to pass you over to Caitlin, who's going to give you a bit more detail.
Thank you so much, Kate. So thank you so much to everyone for being here. As Kate mentioned, I'm Caitlin from Natural England, and in this first section, I'm just going to introduce the Life Recreation Remedies project. So Remedies stands for Reducing and Mitigating Erosion and Disturbance Impacts Affecting the Seabed. And as Kate mentioned, more info can be found at saveourseabed.co.uk, along with lots of great resources for downloading. So this is a partnership project led by Natural England in partnership with the RYA, the Green Blue, Marine Conservation Society, Ocean Conservation Trust, Plymouth City Council, and the Tamar Estuaries Consultative Forum. Next slide, please. So Remedies is a 4-year EU Life-funded project looking to restore and protect sensitive seabed habitats in 5 special areas of conservation around the UK. It's actually recently been extended now, so we'll be going on for the next year until October 2024. The focus of this project is on minimising disturbance to seabed habitats from recreational activities, which includes bait digging, walking, paddle sports, boating, and more. Next slide, please. So one of the 5 SACs that we're working in is the Solent Maritime SAC. This map shows the mapped seagrass extent in the Solent, and this map can be found online at Magic Maps, but we'll give more detail on this later. As you can see, we have a lot of seagrass in the Solent, particularly along the north coast of the Isle of Wight, around the Bewley and Cowshot area, and in the East Hampshire harbours. Next slide, please. So why are we working to restore and protect seabed habitats? So the 5 SACs that we're working in are currently in unfavourable condition. This means without appropriate management, the site and its features will never reach favourable or recovering condition. In particular, we've seen a long-term reduction in the extent and quality of seagrass habitats. And in fact, research has shown that at least 44% of the seagrass around the UK has been lost since 1936, which is a devastating statistic. Seagrass is very susceptible to damage and disturbance from different threats that will be explained later on in this talk. But one of those that has contributed to disturbance, particularly in busy areas such as the Solent, is recreational activity. Therefore, by protecting and raising awareness of seagrass and other sensitive habitats on the seabed, we can help to avoid future loss and ensure the habitats have a chance to recover for the future. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to hand over to Tim to go through a bit more about the seabed habitats, in particular seagrass.
Hello, my name's Tim Ferrero. I'm Senior Specialist for Marine Conservation at Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. We work on the Remedies programme, conducting volunteer surveys of recreational activity in the Solent, but also for approaching 2 decades now, we've mapped and monitored seagrass in the Solent and are now moving into restoration. So what is this plant and this fantastic habitat? Well, the most important thing about seagrass that you need to know is that seagrasses are the only fully marine flowering plants. So they live out their entire life cycle in the marine environment, flowering, setting seed, pollination, everything that a flowering plant does on land, a seagrass plant does in the sea. And we can see that here. We have our adult plants growing from a rhizome or root mat, which is very important. It's often the most sensitive part of a seagrass meadow. The adult plants flower in the summer and slowly grow seeds through the summer into the autumn. On the right, we can see a picture of a seagrass flower. It's called a spathe, and 10 to 15 seeds in a spathe drop down onto the seabed and grow into young plants. So as plants, they're interesting, and as habitats, they're vitally important. They're commonly found in these sort of sheltered coastal areas, and they're really important as habitats, as nurseries, and providing shelter for a number of marine animals. That's recognised in the European Union Habitats Directive, their Annex 1 habitats within that, and also within our UK legislation, Marine and Coastal Access Act, as habitats features of conservation interest. So it really is important that we understand and look after these habitats. Next slide. We've mentioned the sheltered nature. I mean, they really do provide a tremendous amount of habitat for marine life, foraging area, shelter, nursery grounds, hunting grounds, you name it. Habitat is really important because habitat drives biodiversity. So the habitat structure that seagrass meadows provide is really important in supporting marine biodiversity. Something that's really sort of in the public eye at the moment is their role as blue carbon stores. They are, of course, plants. They photosynthesize, they take carbon dioxide out of the water and they store it in their leaves and their roots. And that's an important carbon store in itself. But really importantly, seagrass meadows cause sediment to build up on the seabed. And it's that build up of sediment on the seabed that really is the important carbon bank. And although seagrass meadows, well, they cover about 30 million hectares worldwide, which sounds like a lot, but it's only about 0.2% of the seabed. But they actually store 10 to 12% of the ocean's carbon. So they really are punching well above their weight. And you often hear people like David Attenborough say they store carbon dioxide 30 times faster than the rainforest. Well, that's one tropical species in one study. Our temperate species, they do store carbon, maybe not as fast as that, but it's not much point having a battle of numbers over these things. If you're 1 times as good as the tropical rainforest, you're significantly important. And they also support our commercial fisheries. The 9 most popular seafood species in the UK are reliant on seagrass meadows, and in fact about 70% of commercial species all utilize seagrass meadows at some point in their life life cycle. So in the Solent, we have things like cuttlefish and bass, for example, that really use seagrass meadows. And also, as they raise the seabed and the leaves waft in the water, they absorb wave energy and protect our coast from erosion. A real benefit is they in theory can reduce the amount of coastal protections we have to build. And their roots can be involved in the uptake of nitrogen as well, which is very important. Next slide. But let's have a look at this biodiversity. Really fantastic, the sort of animals that seagrasses support. I think very familiar to a lot of people is the role that seagrasses have in supporting seahorse species, which of course are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. And here on the left we see a picture of a short-snouted seahorse, which we certainly have quite a lot of in the Solent, quite a lot of records of that, and they certainly make use of seagrass meadows. This one here is attaching itself to a seagrass plant. There's another species, the long-snouted seahorse, which is almost an obligate, it has to be in seagrass, and although we don't have so many records for that from the Solent, it is there. Other things like this stalk jellyfish, again, protected species, a species focus of it, conservation interest, utilising the leaves of the seagrass to attach to. They're sedentary, they don't move, so they really rely on this habitat. And oh, I've just seen a question pop up. We work with Project Seagrass, and this sort of sea hare as well, fantastic mollusk. And if you're ever on the shore and see something looking like gelatinous pink crazy string, and it's springtime, that will be sea hare eggs, and they're often laid in and around seagrass meadows. Next slide, please. More biodiversity closely related to seahorses, pipefish. We see a lot of them in our seagrass meadows in the Solent, and that elongated shape, the way they move through the seagrass, it provides really excellent camouflage for them. In fact, sort of pipefish and seagrass in many ways demonstrate almost everything you need to know about the importance of this habitat. Our cuttlefish there, this is a migratory species, comes into the Solent every year in springtime to breed, and the females actually attach their eggs to seagrass leaves. That's how intimately associated they are with the seagrass. The females then die almost immediately, and cuttlefish only live for 2 years. So it's a stock that relies on really successful recruitment, and therefore its habitat is vitally important. And here's one of our commercially important species over on the right. Place, of course, hunting and foraging through the seagrass, and its juveniles using it as nursery grounds as well. Next slide. So we've got this fantastic, interesting species, marine flowering plant, a very important habitat. Unfortunately, it's a habitat which faces many threats. And looking at this slide, we have our global ones. We have global warming, sea temperature, ocean acidity, and sea level rise, all really significant threats to seagrass, either affecting its physiology, the temperature and acidity, or affecting the space it has to live, because these are shallow and intertidal plants, and sea level rise, particularly where we have a built-up marine environment, like in many areas in the Solent, can have this thing called coastal squeeze. They get squeezed out, not enough space to grow. Below that, we can see a fantastic carpet of green algae, which is the result of eutrophication or over-fertilization of our coastal waters from land runoff, from use of agricultural fertilizers, not helped by our lovely discharges of combined sewage overfalls as well. And these algal blooms in the water, they shade out the light reaching the seagrass, and in intertidal areas like in our harbours, they actually at low tide blanket and lie on top of the seagrass meadows, potentially smothering them. Other threats of particular interest are things like bait digging, well, that physically uproots the seagrass and can be very damaging. We have our Fido there, which I think is our dog walkers, but walkers in general, and people walking over seagrass meadows can damage them through trampling. And then in the centre we have, of particular interest to the boating community, we have moorings and anchoring systems which can cause damage to seagrass meadows. And so it's important for the boating community. The boating community has a role to play in protecting and looking after our seagrass meadows. I count myself as part of that community in a small way, in a GP14 sized way, in fact. So we're all in many ways responsible and involved. Next slide. And so this is a real Isle of Wight scene here, and we can see on the right a collection of various vessels sailing, motorboats, ribs, anchored up, probably enjoying a fantastic lunch just off the coast of the north of the Isle of Wight. And on the left, this is essentially the habitat that they're operating over, because this is Osborne Bay, an incredibly popular spot for boaters. Our recreational surveys have picked up 100 boats in an hour in Osborne Bay. And so there is this potential for an interaction between boating activities and these protected seagrass meadows. Next slide. This is the sort of thing that we're talking about. This is the result of anchoring. Obviously, anchors often have a chain section at the bottom which lies on the seabed, and as your boat at anchor moves around with wind and tide and waves, the chain tends to move over the seabed, and that, through abrasion over a long period of time, can wear away the seagrass, or the chain can, if you like, snatch, twist and pull up leaves, pull up roots of seagrass in the chain itself. So when we drop an anchor with chain onto the seabed in a seagrass meadow, there is potential for damage to occur. And when you retrieve the anchor, in particular, if it gets dragged through the seagrass, dragged through the root mat, that can also be a source of damage. Next slide, please. Traditional swing moorings, of course, are essentially fixed anchoring systems, so they behave in much the same way, but they just don't move. And so in many ways, the damage can be more severe and more permanent. In particular, you start off with a lump, very often a concrete block, which physically covers the seabed and reduces the area for seagrass to grow if it's within a seagrass meadow. And then, of course, again, the chain with wind and tide, as boats move round and round a mooring over long periods of time, can wear really significant scars in the seabed. You can see this in this picture from St Mary's, lovely clear water, as we only occasionally get in the Solent, but you can see the clear scars inside what would otherwise be a much larger seabed. And of course, in highly tidal areas at low tide, you get even more chain lying on the seabed, so that the impact can be magnified. Next slide, please. I'm going to finish up just with this fantastic video. On the left, you can see a traditional mooring, a block. There it is on the video with the chain attached to it. So the block is covering the seabed in itself, and a boat owner actually made this video. Moving out from the block, you can see the chain lying on the seabed. This is a sandy bottom, which is pretty bare, and it's sort of covered in sort of rubble, bits and bits of broken shell, but there's not much standing stock of marine life at all. So that indicates that this is being disturbed. And then lo and behold, as we reach the end of the anchor's limit, there suddenly we can see the seagrass meadow. It's a very sharp cutoff, and beyond that influence of the chain, a fantastic, very luxuriant seagrass meadow, in fact, and that really indicates the significance of potential damage from boating activities. Next slide. So I'm now going to hand over or back to Kate, who's going to tell you about the sorts of things that you might be able to do to reduce that damage or that potential damage.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, it really brings it to light when you see the videos underwater and kind of what's underneath the hull of our vessels and what's going on there. And those two pictures at Osborne Bay where you've got the seagrass and then you've got the water and the tides coming and the boats above. And we don't always get to see that seagrass unless it's on sort of spring tides there. So it kind of, yeah, what's beneath our hull and what are we doing as boaters to impact on that? But the great thing is that is things that we can do to help protect or at least minimise our impact on these habitats. So like I said before, the Our Way is a partner in the Remedies project. And we've been brought in as a partner because we want to raise awareness amongst the boating community of where these seagrass areas are, what is seagrass, and also share some techniques and best practice that we can all adopt to help protect these beautiful places that we like to go and visit, and also enable us to continue visiting these places. So one of the things that we first did in the project a few years ago is we developed the Anchoring and Mooring Guide. And this contains a real brief overlook of what the project's about, introduction to seagrass, and also gives anchoring top tips and an introduction to the advanced mooring systems. So it's a great resource that you can download directly from the Green Blue website, and we will be popping a link into the chat. But here on the screen is a QR code, so you can hold your cameras up on your phones and then access the website page for that immediately. You can order these in hard copies as well. So if you are part of a club, a centre or a marine business, then you can order batches of these for free to hand out to members or customers. So definitely worth going on there and having a look. The other thing that we looked at early on in the project is once we were talking to boaters, it was very clear that after we understand the importance of these habitats is we want to protect them. But first of all, where are they? So in terms of deciding where we're going to anchor, we need to know where they are in the first place. So the project has been doing work behind the scenes on this. And the first thing we did with the Our Way is we developed charts, and they are on the Green Blue website under Anchoring with Care, which is a web page that we have that has all the advice and information. And now what we're doing is we're developing nautical charts with the seagrass areas on. So you can see here on the right hand side, this is a graphic that we have recently developed for the Plymouth site in Remedies, and we will be developing one for the Solent as well. And these are going to go on metal signs at marinas. So marinas across the Solent, if you are visiting or a berth holder at any of those, then hopefully you'll get to see these. But we'll also make this graphic available for download as poster, as a visual digital graphic for the boating community to access. In terms of visuals on the water, we are looking at having marker buoys. So you can see one in the top right hand corner here, the yellow one. Now that is to indicate the boundary of a voluntary no anchor zone in Jenny Cliff Bay in Plymouth, and that's where the Ocean Conservation Trust have been replanting seagrass. And this is something that the project's potentially going to be looking at for Osborne Bay, to help boaters understand exactly where the boundary is, because out of sight, it's very difficult. And if you're not going online and looking at charts and maps where the seagrass is, it's a really nice way of, when you approach a site, to actually say, there's the boundary. And then you know if you anchor outside of that, you're doing the best you can to protect it. These voluntary no anchor zones are voluntary because there's an understanding that sometimes as a boater we need to go into those areas for safety reasons. And that's why they're set up in that way. But it is that kind of, please do not anchor within the site if it's not a health and safety issue there. And then that's really going to help rejuvenate and restore that habitat. The other thing is a great tool to use, which means you can explore seagrass not just in the 5 sites for the Remedies, but across the whole of the UK. And it's the Magic Map tool. So this is an online interactive map. We will put a link in there, but just to give you a bit clearer visual on what that looks like. So when you go onto that website, it's run by DEFRA. You'll come up with an interactive map like this with a legend on the left hand side, and I've just done a snapshot here to show you exactly what you need to click on to reveal the seagrass layers on that map. So it used to be a lot more complicated and very academic, and it's great that this site is now grouped all the seagrass together under national seagrass layer. So all you have to do is select marine, because we're looking at a marine habitat, national seagrass layer, and then seagrass current extent. And then you just have to click all the boxes underneath, and it will reveal on the map the seagrass. And then you can zoom in and out, explore around the UK. So next time you're doing a route of passage or deciding you're going to go and visit somewhere and choose an anchoring point, do go on this and have a look, and then you'll know if seagrass is there. And then you can make that educated decision to maybe anchor somewhere else or find a way of anchoring outside. But we understand that the nautical charts are really important with that, because it gives you the depth contour lines. So if you know the seagrass is within the 5 metre depth contour, which most of the time it is, anchoring outside of that 5 metre as a rule of thumb, it means that you're going to be minimising that damage and encroaching into the seagrass in those more shallower waters. So the other thing is the kind of root of what you need to be thinking about is, once you've identified where the seagrass is, the first thing is to anchor and moor away from those seagrass areas. So either outside of the areas or somewhere completely different. The next thing is, if your only option is to go into those seagrass areas, see if you can identify whether there is an advanced eco mooring system. And don't worry, I'll tell you what one of those is, but it's a mooring system designed to minimise impact on the seabed. There are far and few between those within the 5 sites at the moment, but we do have some in place, and we're hoping that across the UK more of these mooring systems will be put in place as a result, and a legacy of all the work that's going on, not just by our project, but other seagrass projects as well. The other thing is, if there is no advanced mooring systems, use an existing mooring, because it's already there, it's already created the damage. And then last of all, if you do have to anchor and that is your only option, then there's some things you can do to minimise the impact of it. And the first thing is minimising the drag of the anchor. And this is really what you would learn on an RWA course in terms of making sure your vessel is secure. So we don't want our anchor dragging, we don't want the vessel moving. So making sure you're using the right anchor for sand if it's a seagrass area, because that's where seagrass is growing. And then keeping that chain to an absolute minimum for your vessel. So this is just a diagram explaining the RWA's recommendations for how much chain versus the highest depth of water that you'll be in that location. But you'll know your vessel and you'll know what's going to be the best amount. But the point we're trying to get across here is keep it to an absolute minimum. Why is that? This diagram is a really nice way of illustrating how even an extra 2 meters of chain lying on the seabed can have a massive additional impact. So the diagram here, we've got the anchor point on the seabed, and then we've got the purple arrow, which is 6 meters of chain laid out. Now, if that did a full pivot around that anchor point in the wind and tide, it could potentially abrade up to 130 meters squared of that seabed. Now, sometimes you might say, you know, let's just put out an extra meter, an extra couple of meters just to be extra secure here. If we did that and there was 8 meters extra, for example, so an additional 2 meters on the seabed, then it goes up to 201 meters squared abrasion area. So that's nearly double. So it really signifies those small little changes we can make in our boating, and making sure when we're deploying our chain, getting it as accurate as possible. Now, you might have a vessel that counts the amount of meters of chain going out, which is really accurate, or you might have your crew on the foredeck that need to flake that out. Now, you can either flake it out like on the deck here to get the right meters, or sometimes the crew will use markers on the chain to determine how many meters are going out, and we recommend marking the chain at 2 meter intervals, 5 meter intervals to help with that, and then you're going to get that more accurate. I have been on vessels where they count, and as the chain's going out, I don't know if that's accurate enough. Having those markers on there is definitely a better way forward. If you are a dinghy sailor or water sports and rib, I know some of you on the webinar this evening are, then there are obviously impacts happening from there, from the trailer wheels going through landing and launching on those shallow seabed areas, and not just seagrass habitats, but all sorts of other habitats. Even mud flats are habitats. So the best thing we can do is use designated slipways wherever possible, because that means the slipways are going over that habitat, and that activity is happening in that one location rather than across the entire beach, if that makes sense. So that's our recommendation there. And also, as boat users, just thinking about water quality and what we're actually discharging from our vessels, be it cleaning products, sewage, from our toilets on board, they all contribute to having an impact on these habitats. So there are things we can do that maybe are less direct than the anchoring and moorings. So advanced mooring systems. So this is really exciting new technology to help us as boaters still visit these beautiful coves and beaches, but have minimal impact. So what is an advanced mooring system? I'm going to show you a quick little video here. There is music, but there's also subtitles as well, and a voiceover.
Our coastlines are enjoyed by millions of boaters every year, but with these numbers only set to grow, some of our fragile marine ecosystems are increasingly under threat. Traditional swing moorings can damage seabed habitats, like seagrass and merle beds, that provide homes for marine wildlife, support coastal economies, and play a vital role in carbon storage and the fight against climate change. In these traditional moorings, a chain with a floating buoy at one end attaches to an anchor block on the seabed. As the tide and wind changes, sections of the chain can scour the seabed, causing damage. With advanced mooring systems, or AMS, the buoy on the surface is attached either through a highly durable elastic riser or a chain riser with a series of floats, stopping contact between the riser and the seabed. Additionally, the traditional anchor block, which can move in strong weather, can be exchanged for a helical screw anchor, carefully screwed into the seabed. AMS are reliable, insurable, and take up less space than traditional moorings. Having been used elsewhere in the world for 30 years, AMS are now being trialled across the UK to ensure we preserve and continue to enjoy our wonderful coastline for decades to come. Be part of the solution. To find out more, visit saveourseabed.co.uk.
So that gives you a little bit of a visual reference of the difference between a traditional swing mooring and the new AMS versions. But just to give you some real life sort of imagery of what these advanced mooring systems look like. So first of all, in the video, it's mentioned a helical screw. So you can see here in the image a 2-meter helical screw. That's to replace the anchor block. So that goes down through the sediment, and as it's twisted, you can measure the torque and exactly what tonnage of weight that particular helical screw can hold. So it allows us to more accurately determine the type of weight of vessel that can be moored to these, which is great. And the actual helical screws, they're not new technology. It's used in the construction of buildings, and actually the our old jetties use these kind of piles and screw methods. But in the olden days, to screw it into the seabed, they used horses and people to turn around them. So that's ABC anchors that provide that, and then there's different companies providing the flex area here. So in the photograph, you can see this is Hazelet Marine. So this is their flex riser. We've also got another company called C-Flex, and there's one called SafeMoor, which I think is slightly smaller than the C-Flex and Hazelet Marine versions, and they're using those in Wales at the moment as part of linked to the Seagrass project, which is another project working alongside the Remedies project. So I'm just going to show you a video to show you how the helical screws put in. I always find this sort of fascinating. So we have a diver that will go under the water with this mechanism here, which attaches to the helical screw. It's powered by a vessel, or if it's close to the shore, then it can be powered from there. And it drills down into the seabed, and the diver's there to hold that equipment. And I think above his head, there's also a kind of inflatable float to make sure that helical screw's kept in a vertical position. But you can see here it's rotating and drilling that helical screw into the seabed nice and securely. And then at the very end, you can see here, all you see above the seabed is the top of the helical screw, a shackle is attached, and then that's where you get the riser that then gets attached to this bit here, and it will swivel on this point. and that's obviously to help when the boat's moving with the wind. But you can see how much less space it takes up than those big blocks, giving the opportunity for more seagrass and habitat to grow around it. The other mooring system that was shown in the video is, instead of having these elastic rides, you still have the helical screw. You could still have an anchor block on there, but ideally a helical screw. You still have the chain, but you have floats intermittently put up along the chain, and these are put in at specific locations to make sure it's going up through the water column. Now, this is an advanced Sterling mooring. There's a few that are in at Yarmouth, and Caitlin will talk about that later. And there's also some of these down in Portsmouth Bay. This particular video was down in. It's a really good representation as well. You can see where on the buoys the vegetation is growing. That's where the chain is rubbing. That's exactly what's happening on the seabed to prevent vegetation from growing like seagrass. So that brings me to the end of what the Our Way is doing, and what we're doing to help the boating community to protect these seabed habitats, and also some information to help you do your bit as well, and hopefully going forward some of that best practice we'll adopt, and we'll see more seagrass returning and restoring. I'm now going to pass you over to Caitlin, who's going to give us some more specific information about what the project's been doing in the Solent.
Thank you, Kate. So yeah, I'm just going to go through some of the really great work that's been going on in the Solent with remedies. Here you can see some examples of seagrass in the Solent, including around Osborne Bay and Yarmouth as well. Next slide, please. So first, we're just going to look a bit closer at where the seagrass actually is in the Solent. So in this picture, you can see the edges of a bed in Yarmouth at low tide, where there's quite an extensive bed, as we can see from the map. So one thing to note with the Magic Map National Seagrass Layer is these maps show the current mapped data on seagrass that we have. So this is not the full extent of seagrass in the Solent. There is areas that we don't have data mapped yet, but we're hoping to be adding more data and mapping and surveying more seagrass moving forward as well. So hopefully these maps will be updating as we continue to work on seagrass. Next slide, please. So in the central Solent area, we've got seagrass. You can see an example of Osborne Bay here at low tide. And actually on this map as well, this doesn't just show the current extent of seagrass, but we can also see historical seagrass records on this map. So these are areas where seagrass, we had data that seagrass used to exist, but doesn't exist anymore. So for example, we can see it around Calshot and Leap. And that is seen in those lighter purple and green colours. So we can see in both these areas the seagrass beds used to be a bit more extensive and extend further out than they currently do. Next slide, please. And finally, we have an example of seagrass in Langston Harbour and the map showing the East Hampshire harbours. And again, we can see the current seagrass, but also where that seagrass has been lost previously. And again, we will be updating these moving forward. So that's not the full extent of seagrass in the East Hampshire harbours. Next slide. So Remedies has a few different areas that we work in to protect and restore seabed habitats. The one of these is to working on reducing the pressure on seagrass habitats through the installation of advanced mooring systems. So as we saw, these can be very effective in reducing that scouring impact from traditional moorings. In the Solent, we've worked with some really great harbour authorities to switch some traditional moorings to AMS and trial some AMS. So there's been 4 installed in Yarmouth Harbour. They've been in there for a while now and have shown great success. And we have 2 that have recently been installed at Cowes Harbour. And we'll be undertaking monitoring around the 2 that have just gone in Cowes. So we can hopefully monitor how the seagrass changes and hopefully improves around those 2 AMS as well. All of those 6 that have gone in have been of the Sterling kind. So as you can see from the picture and the infographic here, the one with the floats along the riser. We also are going to be doing some monitoring to aid with subtidal cleanups. So removing old mooring blocks and chains from seagrass beds and allowing them to populate those areas that they currently can't. And we're currently in discussions about a proposed voluntary no anchor zone in Osborne Bay. We're going to be hosting 2 open community conversations around this proposal, one in Cowes and one in the Hamble. You can find more information on those on the event page of our website if you'd like to attend. We welcome any feedback on the proposal, which is just in the middle of that bottom row there, the Osborne Bay Wildlife Voluntary No Anchor Zone proposal. This will be available for download shortly on our website and summarises all of the information in research that's gone into why it's needed, what we're proposing exactly, and how you can get involved. Next slide, please. So another key work area for Remedies project is restoration. We're doing amazing restoration with our partners Ocean Conservation Trust leading on this. So this began in the Solent with planting last spring around the mouth of the Beaulieu River. This was Hessian bag planting, which will be shown in this video here. Some amazing volunteers came together to bag seagrass seeds into these Hessian sacks.
Cubed sand, put it in a Hessian bag, and then get the smidgen, and you need to get roughly between 15 and 30 seeds, and just pop them on the sand. And then give it a mix around, and then tie it at the top, really tight.
Amazing. So that work was captured and shared on Countryfile, which was really exciting for the project and great to be shown countrywide like that. The Ocean Conservation Trust have been working hard. They've been collecting seed and preparing for the next round of planting in the Solent, which will be going on this spring. And that is included looking at an innovative new method of planting, which we'll hopefully be able to share more information on moving forward. As well as this, we have a Solent Seagrass Restoration Working Group with representatives from ourselves on the Remedies Project, Project Seagrass, the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust and the WWF. And this group is designed for knowledge sharing and communication across all restorative efforts for seagrass in the Solent and is a really great community. Next slide, please. Okay. So this video was taken during the seagrass planting in the Plymouth Sound, so not the Solent, but shows the same method that was used last spring as part of the Remedies project. Some very dramatic music there to punctuate some seagrass planting. Next slide. And so finally then, the final area of work that we'll cover in Solent is surveys, monitoring and engagement. So we do a lot of work in this area, including the Natural England Dive Unit took surveys to look at the health of some of the seagrass in the Solent Maritime SAC. The Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust lead on recreation activity surveys that take place during the summer months. So those have been going on for 2 years now with plans to continue this summer. And we try to get out to lots of events with the RYA and Green Blue as well, leading a lot of our boat show and events, including the Southampton Boat Show, the RYA Dinghy and Water Sports Show. We also attended the Noel Turner Science Festival and the Beauty Conservation Awareness Day, along with other events. On top of this, there's been individual school outreach and workshops, webinars like this one, and talks at boating clubs. All of these are to raise awareness of seagrass as a vital habitat, share the work that is ongoing to protect it, and how best practice can be used to minimise our impact on this habitat. We have fun things like making a wildflower seed bomb, which is kind of the terrestrial equivalent of the Hessian seed bags that you saw being deployed into the Solent and into Plymouth. And we're hoping to be attending all of these and more this year as well. So if you're attending any of those, look out for us there. And with that, I will be passing back to Kate to finish up.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, I also wanted to mention on April 21st to 23rd, there'll be the Green Tech Boat Show at MDL Marinas at Ocean Village in Southampton. So the Green Blue will be there with a stand, and ourselves will also be delivering a talk on the Saturday. But please do come along. You can look at an advanced mooring system in real life. You can see in the middle picture there, that was it, one of the Green Tech boat shows down in Plymouth, and you can see the Seaflex mooring there, just to give you an idea of what that contraption is on the table. But please come along, and you'll also be able to find out more things about how you can be more sustainable with your boating in the latest green technology in our sector. So that brings us towards the end of the webinar. So just to recap, we gave you an introduction of the Remedies project, what it stands for, what it's about, and why it was set up. And then we were introduced to one of the habitats that we're trying to protect. Merle is another one, which you can see here, but that only exists in the Falmouth and Helford site. But we're also looking at protecting that exists in slightly deeper waters than seagrass, so tends to have maybe less interaction when it comes to the anchoring and moorings. And then we looked at other threats as well, the bigger picture that, you know, the project is aware that there's other things going on with seagrass, but it's that tipping point again of any additional pressure that's added onto this habitat is enough, you know, to cause that extra additional adverse effects. And then I gave you some top tips on what you can do as a boat user, where you can locate seagrass. And then we had an update from Caitlin on all the fantastic stuff we've been doing in the Solent. It's now an opportunity for questions and answers, so we'll have a look in the chat, maybe have a think about any questions you might like to ask us here now. There is a survey, it's only about 5 minutes to complete. There's a QR code on the screen now, and I will pop in a link into the chat. But essentially it's a survey to understand what you've learned during the webinar, what kind of best practice you might adopt as a boat user going forwards. And there's also a section there to provide any additional feedback, either on the webinar, anything you want the project to know about from a boat user's perspective, or any additional questions, and then we can connect you directly with specific people. But please do fill that in, because that gives us feedback on what the boating community is actually thinking about all of this, and whether there is an actual intent from the boating community to want to protect these areas. So please do scan that in, and I will pop a link in. So have we got any questions that we can see, any additional ones?
Yeah, so the one in the chat from Adrian is, will you be getting these added to chart plotters and in the almanacs?
So yeah, the almanac one from IMRE went out, I think, beginning of this year. So I think that lasts for quite a long time. So unfortunately, within that main book, we wouldn't be able to have the seagrass layers in there. But what we're working on with the Hydrographic Office is providing them with the seagrass data, which they're welcome to have, and then distributing that out to the digital chart software companies, and then continuing to work with IMRE, looking at their paper charts as well, and having the seagrass areas included in there, or at least where the voluntary no anchor areas are, so we're aware as boaters. So yeah, there's definitely work going on behind the scenes there. There is other apps like Savvy Navi, which have added seagrass layers onto there. With a lot of these things, we're saying don't use them as maybe navigational, but at least you can look them up, find out where the seagrass is. And then we've got the magic mapper, which I introduced earlier, which is probably has all the most up-to-date information, because that comes from Natural England, from wildlife trusts, from universities that go out and are actually mapping those. So that's where all of our data would originate from, and then it'd just be a case of finding different channels and avenues like the digital charts. But don't worry, that is something that we're definitely looking into, because of the feedback that we've had from boat users. I'm just going to put a link into the survey just quickly, so if you prefer to click on a link rather than using the QR code. Any other questions that were earlier on?
I think the one from earlier on's been answered, but I think Mike's got his hand up, and I've just allowed your mic so you can come off mute to ask your question.
It isn't. Oh, hang on, see if I can get. Yes, hello, Mike Samuelson. I come from the East White, and I was just slightly surprised that the seagrass beds off Priory Bay and off the Bembridge Ledge, which Tim knows well, because he's been down there on many occasions. I don't show on the magic map, but let's not worry about that at the moment. Just to say, if anybody is on the island, come to the eastern end of the Isle of Wight, and 3/4 way up the walkway to the Bembridge RNLI offshore boathouse, look down at obviously at sort of low water, and you will get the most stunning view without getting your feet wet of a seagrass meadow. That's all I wanted to just add in.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Mike. Yeah. So you don't. Some of the seagrass is intertidal. You can see some of them when the tide goes out. So that's a great spot if you're on the island. And of course, if you're in other areas like Osborne Bay, you might have that opportunity at lower tides if you are walking or visiting Osborne House, for example. But yeah, fantastic. Having a look. Will you be doing any more seagrass planting over the coming months?
Yes, definitely. Yes, there will be seagrass planting over the coming months. Spring is our favourite time to get out there planting. So for remedies, that'll be happening most likely in April time. But I know for a fact that Tim is already out there with the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust planting, and Project Seagrass will also be doing their planting. So lots going on in the Solent over the spring.
I was going to ask Tim, is there any opportunities coming up for people to get involved in doing the planting, doing some volunteer work with yourselves?
You can certainly, well, if you have a look at our trust webpage and search for Solent Seagrass Champion, so you can sign up to be a seagrass champion, and there are a number of sort of things that seagrass champions can do. We're actually planting today. That's likely to be our last planting now until the autumn. But in the meantime, we'll be doing seagrass surveys in the springtime and through the summer. And then in late summer, July, August time, we'll start collecting seed as well, which is also something that people can get involved in. Which can involve snorkeling over the seagrass, some of the fantastic locations where we collect seed, and that in itself is quite a treat. So that is one route if you want to get involved. Check out our website, Solent Seagrass Restoration Project and Solent Seagrass Champions.
Yeah, great. And there's other opportunities, volunteering with Marine Conservation Society as well. So they have a volunteer manager for the southeast region and southwest. But if you go on the saveourseabed.co.uk website, there is a volunteer section on there, and you can contact the project directly to find out ways that you can get involved. And it depends on what kind of thing you would like to do. And then you can get pointed to either one of us. You can either work directly with the Green Blue, you can work with Ocean Conservation Trust down more in the southwest. So yeah, do get involved, and that can be a way also of giving back as well, which is nice. I know I did the volunteering around creating the seed bags at Portsmouth University to be deployed out in the Solent. Lots of volunteers. It was great to meet all sorts of different people coming together for a great cause. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. Is there any more questions from anybody before we close the webinar? Okay, well, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us. It's a great step forward in having the boating community coming to learn about this and seeing how you can make a difference. So thank you very much. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Caitlin and Tim for joining me this evening to deliver the talk and sharing their expertise in their areas. And I look forward to seeing many more of you on future webinars that we might be delivering.